Welcome to this week's Iraq briefing, where we cover the top stories shaping Iraq today. We're just two guys talking about some of the latest developments. I'm Erik Gustafson with Enabling Peace in Iraq Center, and my colleague, Omar Al-Nadawi. How are you, Omar?
I'm good, Eric. Good to be here again.
Excellent. So, the top story that we're covering today is the prison break in Syria. Over 100 detainees escaped, and many of them are alleged to be ISIS fighters or even known ISIS figures. So let's get into this. First of all, can you just give us a little bit of a background about, these dozen detention centers across northeast Syria and the dynamics in terms of the conflict in the area between the SDF and the Syrian government?
All right. So, since the war with ISIS in both Iraq and Syria, thousands of ISIS fighters, suspects, and suspected ISIS fighters and civilians with suspected ties to ISIS have been held in these dozen or so camps and prisons in northeast Syria. Most of those, or all of those detention centers, have been under the control of the Syrian Democratic Forces. That's the Kurdish-led security force that are in charge of that quadrant of Syria. They're U.S. allies. They have fought alongside the U.S. and the international coalition in during the effort to defeat ISIS. The problem is, for many months, the SDF has been at odds with the Syrian government. There have been difficulties in integration in post-Assad Syria. Clashes broke out multiple times, and they have intensified in recent months. The Syrian government has been making advances in those regions, and that has actually forced the SDF to pull back under pressure, and that has undermined the security of some of those facilities. Like you mentioned at the beginning, there was a prison break from Al Shaddadi. That's one of the prisons in Hasaka province in Syria. The Syrian government has acknowledged that more than 120 prisoners have escaped. Some 80 of them have been recaptured, but a couple dozen remain on the loose. And that's just really the tip of the iceberg in terms of the security threat here. People in Syria, people in Iraq, people in the US, and around the world are really concerned about the thousands and thousands of hardened ISIS fighters, ISIS suspects, families with potential ties to ISIS who could escape if the security situation deteriorates further in Syria. And that's why one of the big, I think, headlines in Iraq and in Syria during the later part of this week was this initiative to proactively transfer thousands of those detainees into Iraq. CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, is helping Iraq with that in coordination with Syria to move these people into Iraq to avoid something going sideways.
Wow. So can you now, I think it's important to make the distinction, and I heard you make that distinction. Some of these individuals are known ISIS fighters, some are alleged, suspected, and then you have families with alleged affiliation with ISIS. Now, these detainees, I mean, they haven't undergone trials, correct?
Right, that's the thing is, they're widely believed to be ISIS members, but some of these people have been held for 10, 11 years without trial. So we can't really generalize and say everyone there is a hardened ISIS terrorist. That's not the case. Certainly, no one is guilty until they go through proper due process. So we have to be
Mhm.
careful how we label these folks, especially that there are a lot of civilians who have been grouped into this in the process.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that there were cases at the Al-Hol camp where they even found Yazidis in the camp
Indeed.
that had been,
Yeah.
kidnapped.
Yazidi civilians who were actually kidnapped by ISIS who have been, who were forced to stay in Al-Hol, have been held at Al-Hol for years and years and years, only to be freed recently. But yeah, that just showcases that it's not a uniform scene.
Yeah. So estimates of between 7,000 and 9,000 detainees. Do we know, is there a breakdown between the family members versus the alleged fighters?
Yeah, I think the focus right now is on the alleged fighters, ISIS fighters. The U.S. is working with the Iraqi government to move between 7 and 9,000 of those into Iraq. Iraq already has a program to repatriate the civilians with suspected ties to ISIS who are Iraqi nationals. And there are about 4,000 of them left at Al Hol. We spoke about that in one of our recent briefings. So that's a kind of like a separate track for the repatriation of people with suspected ISIS ties. But right now, the focus really, because it's a is on the alleged fighters or suspected fighters, because they present the highest potential security threat to Iraq and Syria and to really the whole region.
So now let's talk about those individuals where they are, military age and suspected to be actual ISIS fighters. What happens once they're transferred to Iraq?
Well, a lot of the details are not clear yet.
Mhm.
Iraq has already received 150 of these transferred detainees. They were moved in on Wednesday, according to CENTCOM. Iraq has not said where these people are going to be held. And 7,000 or 9,000, that's a large number to move in a matter of a few days or a few weeks. And we know from government data that Iraqi prisons are already overcrowded, 200%
Mhm.
capacity as of a few months ago. So we know that absorbing this large number of detainees is going to be a logistical problem for Iraq. Obviously, putting them in regular prisons is going to be a risky business. Creating or building new facilities to hold them that are going to be secure enough is going to be a challenging process for Iraq that maybe would inadvertently replicate some of the security concerns that they're trying to address by moving them into Iraq. So,
Yeah, can we stop there? Because let's drill into that specific detail. I think some viewers will already be aware of this, but some may not, about what led to ISIS in the first
mhm,
place. Going back to 2012 and 2013,
yeah,
when you had, at the time, it was Al Qaeda in Iraq, and they had the whole breaking the walls operations, and I mean, prisons, huge prisons.
yeah.
I believe wasn't it Taji prison was one of them that where an operation
I
took place. Can you give us that background?
Yeah, it was part of the ISIS resurgence or emergence out of the ashes of Al Qaeda in Iraq, which was largely defeated during the surge operations 2007 through 2009. Al Qaeda in Iraq was rebuilding itself in the following years. After the U.S. military left Iraq and during the period of sectarian policies under Maliki's second term. Um, ISIS conducted at least 8 major prison breaks during 2012, 2013, while it was also building its forces and capabilities across the border in Syria. And that included a prison break at Abu Ghraib, which is one of the most secure, largest, most notorious prison facilities in Iraq. So those traumatic memories are still, looming in the background. People are on edge in Iraq because they remember that period and they are fully aware of what those prison breaks could mean for ISIS's ability to rebuild its capacity. If they manage to free, 1,000 of those hardened fighters, that could become a really, really dangerous threat for both Iraq and Syria, especially at a time when there is a lot of fighting inside Syria between the two parties that are in charge of security in the country, the SDF and the Syrian government. And to be honest, for a lot of Iraqis, I think, and for Iraq watchers, when they look at the situation, and we were talking about this, you and I, before we started recording, is that when you think that Nur al-Maliki could come again to have a third term in office, and you have thousands
Yeah.
of ISIS prisoners on the loose, potentially, that creates a very, very volatile and explosive mix.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, going back to the emergence of ISIS, who was in charge at the time, whose watch did that occur on? It was Nouri al-Maliki.
Exactly.
So just one other thing, going back, I mean, obviously we're deeply concerned about these known ISIS fighters, and we also have seen how prisons have been incubators of radicalization, right? So that there's that issue as well.
Correct.
But there is always the real danger that you could have innocent people in the mix. You talked about when they arrive, the challenges of housing so many detainees, prisoners in a secure way. But what about the legal side? Because I believe the Iraqi government is saying that they're going to have trials. What is that going to look like?
Yeah, that is an area of concern, I think, in with regard to human rights. Like we said, these people are not convicted yet. The Iraqi judiciary says that they plan to put everyone through the proper legal proceedings to investigate and indict and prosecute every one of these new, people who are coming under Iraqi custody. But that raises concerns because Iraq has had a record of some hasty trials where you have thousands of suspects who go through the pipeline really quickly in investigations and trials that don't really meet the international standards for justice. And that raises concerns about, are you going to have people who are innocent get caught in the middle? And the number, I think the large number of detainees who are being transferred to Iraq could increase the pressure on the justice system to move quickly. And we know that there are also political and militia actors in Iraq who have their own peculiar view of what justice is. And they might seize this situation as an opportunity to take revenge rather than to exercise vengeance rather than justice. And who might call for lowering the standards, hastily prosecuting these folks and getting rid of them, really, just to eliminate the
Yeah,
threat by eliminating the people who might cause it, even if that includes, um, uh,
executions.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah.
unfortunate
Wow.
reality that we might be dealing with.
Anything else that you want to speak on this issue in terms of the challenges?
To sum up what we talked about, there is a logistical issue, big
Mhm.
logistical problem in terms of Iraq absorbing this large number of prisoners, and a big question over the issue of repatriation of non-Iraqi nationals. So this was also a part of the news developments of this week, is that the U.S. and Iraq are urging countries, governments who have some of their citizens among these 7,000 or 9,000 detainees to come and get them to reduce the burden on Iraq. But we know, the fact that these people are still there in Syria 11 years or 12 years after they were captured says a lot about the reluctance of some governments to bring in folks who can be dangerous, whose trials are going to be problematic. And I think also the current environment of distrust and a breakdown in cooperation between the US and some of its closest allies in the coalition, in NATO, is
Yeah.
going to be a problem, is going to make it less likely that countries like France or the UK, or any other countries that may have some of their citizens in the mix, to step up and say, yes, we'll take them off your hand right away. And that, of course, that complicates Iraq's problems.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Well, definitely something that we're going to be continuing to watch and follow. A very important developing story in Iraq. Also, just to acknowledge, while there's turbulence happening in Syria, there's also turbulence happening in Iran, and there is still a internet blackout, so we still don't. The information is still kind of trickling out. But I do want to make a shout out for an excellent organization, Iran Human Rights, based in Norway, and we'll make sure we include a link so folks can go there. But that is another story we're going to be following, because if the numbers are, the estimates are in excess of over 10,000 Iranians, protesters killed, killed in cold blood. I think that we could see growing instability in Iran, and that will certainly affect Iraq. So, story to continue to follow. That's it for this week's Iraq briefing. You can follow us at enablingpeace.org. And a lot of what we talk about, you'll always find in our weekly Iraq Security and Humanitarian Monitor Isham. So we'll include a link also so you can subscribe to that. Thanks so much for joining us. Masalama.
Ma salama.